This is the King Freak, Alton Thorne, and you are listening to the Morecambe Wrestling podcast.
I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Alton Thorne today on the Morecambe Wrestling podcast. This is a gentleman who I've been wanting to speak to, certainly since the events of the 20th anniversary of Odyssey Pro Wrestling War on the Shore, when this gentleman made a stunning, shocking, surprise comeback to Morecambe Wrestling for the first time in 8 years, and came back for a specific reason and for a specific person. We'll talk about that on the Morecambe Wrestling podcast, but first of all, Alton, great to see you. It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. Thank you very much for asking me to come on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. We'll talk a little bit about, we'll go right the way through. We'll go through your career. We'll talk about your time in Morecambe Wrestling back in the days of Alpha Omega Wrestling. We'll talk about the big match coming up at Mutiny on Saturday, June the 14th. And we'll talk about what you've been doing in the years since we last saw you in Morecambe as well. But to start off, Alton, let's go right back to the beginning. Is there a particular moment in your early life that you can pinpoint? You can say that is the point in time when you thought to yourself, I want to be a professional wrestler?
No, and the reason for that is because I've got photos of way before I have kind of active memory of me with wrestling books, wrestling toys. I think it was always around me and part of my life. I think my nan, who was probably my biggest inspiration, loved the world of sport like stuff, and when that kind of faded away, she would then go and find car boot sales and buy VHS copies of WWF shows, that kind of thing. So from as early as I can remember, Nana had wrestling on the TV and I used to watch it with her. So I don't remember a specific time or moment, but I know that the thing that made me realize that there was a scene out there that I could be involved in some way was, funnily enough, through Power Slam magazine, which I know you're very familiar with, right? Because we had, when I used to go to the corner shop round the corner from me, they always had two wrestling magazines. One of them was the WWF, WWE magazine, you kind of glossy, like, it was a decent magazine, but it didn't have any real details about wrestling as a whole. But then Power Slam kind of opened my eyes to the idea that there was a whole world of wrestling beyond the WWF and WCW, which are the two things that I really had access to at the time. Like, I didn't know about indie wrestling. I didn't know about Ring of Honor. I had a kind of vague idea about deathmatch wrestling because of Mick Foley. But other than that, I really had no clue. So the first time that I really think I recognized that there's more than just the big companies out there that I could be involved with was through reading Power Slam magazine.
And the strange thing is that we talk about this on the podcast. A lot of people don't realize is Power Slam magazine was produced in Lancaster, literally 5 miles down the road from Morecambe. And its forerunner, Superstars of Wrestling, was actually produced in Morecambe as well. So it's kind of, everything tends to come full circle, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of the guys that I speak to that are kind of on the deathmatch scene have a very similar experience to me, because the Power Slam was one of the few places that you could open it up and see kind of like Crimson Masks and, you know, the kind of different side of wrestling. Like, you get Anita photos and things like that, and it would be like, what's happening here? Where's all this happening? It's like a hub somewhere else that you just felt that if you just became part of it, you could connect to in some way. And that's kind of what's happened, I suppose, you know. So I've got a lot to thank Power Slam for.
So a lot of people who saw those, Anita, the big sort of deathmatch star from Japan in the 90s, a lot of people who saw that coverage in Power Slam of his, you know, no rope, exploding barbed wire. I think it was no rope exploding barbed wire matches, things like that. A lot of people who saw those really graphic photos in Power Slam would then seek out videotapes from Japan, and obviously, you know, ECW and CZW, as it was in America, and XPW. A lot of these promotions were doing that really ultraviolet style of wrestling. IWA Mid-South, I think, sort of in the 90s and early noughties. Were you similar to that? Did you sort of get access to that deathmatch scene through videotapes?
Yeah, 100%. But actually, it started with Ring of Honor for me, because Power Slam would talk a lot about Ring of Honor because it was like really, really hot in the early 2000s. It was like just starting to really push through, and it was a different kind of wrestling because it was kind of like strong style, but in America. And I hadn't really experienced anything like that, and it sounded really intriguing to me. But as I picked up Ring of Honor, they started doing the crossover with CZW. So you would get hardcore wrestlers in Ring of Honor, and that's where I really started to take notice of the alternative and hardcore scene in America. So once again, yeah, it kind of led from Power Slam, but it's kind of following the trail of indie wrestling to get there.
Did you have any particular favourites from the deathmatch scene in America and Japan?
100%. For at the time, Necro Butcher was my he had a touch of Foley about him. He had he was a kind of wild man character, and it immediately connected with me because of the people that I liked in wrestling already. Like that kind of character was always what I was drawn to. But then as I digged in deeper, I was a big fan of Madman Pondo, JC Bailey, there were, but basically, as soon as I started watching, I got completely enveloped in the whole thing. So it was like, okay, CZW Tournaments of Death had all of those, like had a good 6 or 7 of those on DVD. Best of the Best Tournaments had all of those on DVD. Anything I could get hold of at the time, regardless of whether it was like bought legitimately or somebody had just copied it and sent it to me. Any way that I could get hold of wrestling at that period of time, I would just consume as much as humanly possible.
So tell us about your training then initially, because I believe you were trained. Was it House of Pain?
It was.
In Nottingham with Morecambe Wrestling legend, the heavyweight House of Pain, Styx. Tell us about how you found out about that and your memories of your first day walking through the door.
So I was a support worker about 12 years ago for a home for people with learning disabilities and challenging behaviours. And one of the gentlemen that I was supporting was a big football fan, and I'd taken him to the Notts County ground. But he was also a massive wrestling fan, and he loved Triple H, and he would do all the poses. Now, obviously, I couldn't get physical with him because you can't be like touching people that you're supporting. But he would like pretend to throw Triple H punches, and I would pretend to get thrown back by them. Well, it just so happened that House of Pain was based in the Notts County ground at that point. They had a little room up top, and a gentleman had seen him across the street pretending to be Triple H, came over to us and said, "Did you know that there's a wrestling school literally there?" Now, I couldn't take this gentleman back. His epilepsy, autism, lots of reasons that he would have been unable to train. I don't think he'd have understood the nuances of professional wrestling. But for me, that was like a huge eye-opener. It was like, oh wait, I could learn to do this 15 minutes from my door, then there's no way that I wasn't going to get involved after that. It was like just went online, found House of Pain School, messaged Styx. He said, come down to the next session. And as I walked through the door, I was absolutely terrified. I think it's possibly the most scared I've ever been in my life. But I had this feeling in the back of my head that if I tried it out, I'd be good at it. I would have a knack for it, and that turned out to be true. Like my first session went really well. I was put in a side room, but the gentleman who was helping me train took me to Styx about halfway through the session and said, "This guy's already throwing good strikes, taking decent bumps." Styx I showed Styx a couple of things, and the rest is history. I just took off from there. I never stopped after that point. I've been doing it for about 12 and a half years since then.
So that'll be what, 2012?
Yeah, I think I debuted right at the end of 2012, but I think I first trained in 2010. for a little while, then injured my back at work, and I thought I might not get a chance to do this again. But then in 2011, I went back and did a full year's training, and then was able to debut on shows.
I think 2010 would be around the time FWA were doing a few shows in Nottingham, I think, around about that time, because I remember being there doing a bit of commentary for FWA in Nottingham around that time.
Yeah, they were. And again, I just wasn't, I think for a lot of people, we just weren't aware that this stuff was going on. You know, you might occasionally see a poster in the street, but like, had I known that there was like these little hubs of wrestling everywhere, I would have been involved much, much sooner than, what would I have been at the time, about 26, 27? If I'd have known that I could have started at 18, then I would have absolutely been there.
So who else was there with you when you first started? Who else was training with sticks? Who else? People? Any names that people would know who were sort of the UK scene?
Joseph Connors, Gabe Kidd. So immediately, like, that's a guy that went on to be in WWE and a guy that's currently in AEW and New Japan. Like, and I remember I mentioned this quite a lot because it sticks in my head. I remember Jim Ross on one of his podcasts being asked, what makes a good wrestling school? How do you know if you found a good wrestling school? And Jim Ross said, you look at the people that came out of it, you see what they've done, and if it's positive, then you're probably looking at a good wrestling school. So it's quite clear that Styx knows exactly what he's doing, because I walked through the door and Joseph Connors and Gabe Kidd were there. So, you know, and since then, like, so many people that were coming through, like, that are huge names now. Like, Kanji is everywhere at the moment, one of the best female wrestlers in the country by a country mile. I trained with her multiple times. So yeah, like, I was surrounded by talent, people that I could ask for advice, people that I could watch and take pointers from.
So let's move to your debut in Morecambe then, which would be probably a few years after that. I think we're talking early 2017, I think.
Yeah.
And I think it would be just as the shows had moved to the current venue, the Alhambra, because we were previously at a different venue, the Morecambe Winter Gardens, but I think you sort of started round about the time we just moved to the Alhambra, which again, I think was just about the time I was stepping away, because I remember seeing you, but I think I then kind of moved away and didn't see a lot of your career there with Hellbound, which I think lasted pretty much a full year, I think, from looking back at things. So wrestling in Morecambe, I mean, how was that? Is that perceived? You know, before you came, what had you heard about it? Because I'd imagine Styx would have talked about it quite a lot.
100%, because Styx absolutely loved it there. I think he said on the podcast he did review that it was always one of his favorite places to wrestle. So for me, going to Morecambe was huge because I'd been wrestling for about 2 years at that point, and getting reps in the local area, you know, not really stretching too far out of the Midlands. Then the opportunity came up to go to Morecambe, which is 4.5, 5 hours away. So straight away, that's the first time I felt like a traveling wrestler. So that made it huge for me. And then secondly, I was constantly told how invested Morecambe wrestling fans were in the product and how much they cared about it and how passionate they were about it. And you know, in Nottingham, I think wrestling was starting to pick up steam again, but it wasn't quite there. You get small crowds. Like, I remember wrestling in front of 30 people in Beeston that didn't really want to be there, you know. And so Morecambe, when I looked at the pictures, I was like, so this is a full room, absolutely stocked to the brim with wrestling fans that believe and care and are really passionate about the product that they're being shown. So it seemed like a huge opportunity for me to kind of go and ply my trade in like a viable and vibrant wrestling area, because Morecambe definitely has that reputation of it's still real in Morecambe, and the fans like really getting truly and deeply invested in the characters and the stories. And as it turned out when I arrived, all of that is true. That's absolutely 100% true. Morecambe to me is one of the now I wasn't, by that point I wasn't at, you know, I was still learning. I was still figuring things out, but I knew as soon as I kind of exited through the curtain that was a different and special kind of place.
Now, your debut in early 2017, as I understand it, the plan initially, I think, was that you were going to team with Paul Malin. Is that right?
That's right.
Tell us how that went. What the situation was there.
So we were going to be a tag team called the Winter Warriors, because I just kind of changed my look for the first time and was kind of doing a quasi Game of Thrones style look because that was just starting to pop off at the time. And they were going to put me and Paul Malin together, but on the day before the show, I think Malin had some kind of like family emergency and had to drop out. And I was gutted. Like, obviously, I don't blame Paul if family comes first, but I thought that was possibly my chance to go and do something in Morecambe Wasted. But the gentleman who ran the show at the time, was his name Charles, I think, maybe?
Nelson Riley, yes, that's right.
That he kind of said, no, still come down. I think we've got a place for you elsewhere. And that's how Hellbound came about. I was very lucky that he still took a chance on me and gave me the opportunity to be on the show, because Hellbound became kind of pivotal to my career. Like the Hellbound still exists now, you know. So like it made a massive difference to me.
So Hellbound initially was yourself and Barricade, who had also trained at House of Pain and had been a regular in Morecambe for I think the previous couple of years, but hadn't been winning. He hadn't. I don't think he'd won a match. I think until Hellbound. And then there was Dekker, Andre Dekker, who had come out of the Morecambe Wrestling Training School. Dekker and Barricade had been with James Drake. I think in 2016, he'd been their mentor. They'd broken away from him. And then you came along and you formed this, I think it was a trio, but there was also Felony as well, wasn't there, who joined the group, the Living Dead girl. Who again, I think, was she from House of Pain as well?
Yep. Myself, Barricade and Felony used to drive down to the shows together. We all lived in Nottingham. We were all based in Nottingham. Felony, usually in the Nottingham and East Midlands area, was our manager. But at Morecambe, she was also an active wrestler at the time. So all four of us were kind of active on the show. Dekker was the only person from the group that wasn't previously associated with us, but I think he was just a good fit for the kind of look and intensity that we had at the time.
So Hellbound had some really high-profile wins in 2017, you know, joining the tag team division and defeating the likes of, or wrestling with the likes of Solar Power, who were really established teams, Cyanide and Solar, and Big Sexy, who were like really popular in Morecambe at the time. Mr. Big Sean Vasey and Sexy Kev. What are your memories of that time, of Hellbound kind of getting on a winning streak and then becoming the Alpha Omega Tag Team Champions?
So my memories of the matches are quite vague because like that was the period in my career where I was wrestling the most. Like every weekend, 2 to 3 matches, however many I could get for as much money as I could get for it. Just wanted to get as many reps as humanly possible. And the other thing about those Alpha Omega bookings is they're some of the few wrestling matches that I've never been able to watch back. Never had access to them again. So they were kind of, well, I actually really like that because they were a moment in time, you know, that lived in the room, but I've never really been able to go back and look at. And I think that's quite cool because that's like an experience, you know. There's something that we experience together, but then you can't go and kind of watch. Whereas most of my matches are filmed, and so it's kind of like a blurred memory, but also there's certain elements of it that were very sharp in the memory. Wrestling Sexy Kev, who has gone on to be like a kind of more shoot fighter style person, but at the time was essentially a stripper. Like he was. I was kind of trying to do a kind of monster type approach and be aggressive, but he kind of like hooks you up and makes you wrestle and like put me slightly out of my comfort zone. And that was really interesting to me. That was cool because like everything in wrestling is a learning curve. You learn from every match, and being in there with somebody who could do the comedy and entertain the people, but then could switch it on in a second was really interesting. The main thing I remember from the first show relates to you, actually, because I remember I came out, I did an entrance, I was trying to be as aggressive as possible, make sure that everybody knew exactly what my character was without any kind, because they'd never seen me before. So I was like, right, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to be mean and nasty, and they're going to understand exactly who I am. So I came out like kind of full force that day. We had a good match. I remember enjoying the match and everybody was positive. And we went backstage and I saw that you had put a tweet online saying the best thing about this show so far has been Alton Thorne. And because I was such a massive fan of Power Slam and because it was the first time I met you, that was a huge moment for me because it meant that somebody who I respected from the industry had seen what I was doing and was approving of it. So I remember at the time, I think I found your email address from one of the websites online and I sent you an email just thanking you for just being kind about me and saying nice things, because it really felt at that time like a big moment in my career where people that I looked up to were now starting to say, okay, this guy's got something, he's building up something here, he's quite special. So that was one of my key memories from the first show. As for winning the titles, like we kind of did a free birds rule thing. So any one of the three of us could be in the matches, and the other one would be outside the ring, getting into some kind of mischief or shenanigans and winding the fans up. So those matches are kind of like a little bit blurred and bitty because I can't remember exactly when I was in, when I was not. Another thing I remember, wrestling Cyanide. That was the first time I'd wrestled somebody that was that much bigger than me. I had wrestled Barricade a few times. He's a pretty big guy, but Cyanide was absolutely huge. So it was the first time that I'd got into a match as a heel and had to kind of fly and bump around for somebody because usually I'm the more aggressive and big guy. Suddenly I'm hitting a brick wall. So again, another huge learning curve for me early on in my career against top quality talent. It was really, really invigorating and exciting time for me. It felt like the wheels were starting to turn.
Well, this is it. You came in with a lot of passion, a lot of intensity. You really made an impression. Hellbound was a dominant faction. You were the tag team champions. Felony was the women's champion. Everything was going really, really well. But then it all seemed to kind of, I don't know, the wheels came off a little bit towards the end of 2017. And you ended up in this triple threat match, the three of you, Dekker and Barricade, where the loser had to leave, had to go from Morecambe Wrestling altogether. What are your memories of how that came about?
Well, I remember that Dekker was kind of reaching a point where he wanted to branch out on his own. He started drinking quite heavily on all the shows, and he was being a general douchebag, not just to the fans, but to us as well. And we could tell that the faction was starting to get fractured. Like, I don't think he liked being part of a team at that point. I think he wanted the spotlight on him. So that three-way match, the only thing I remember from it is getting hit in the back of the head with a steel chain and taken out of the match completely. I got pinned. I know for sure that the Barricade was still on a couple of shows after that, and then I think Dekker hit him in the head with a bottle on a show or two later. So basically, Dekker kind of, the credit to him, kind of chased the rest of Hellbound out of the company in order to get the spotlight just on him. Which, looking back, like at the time, was frustrating. But now that I've got all this experience and time in the business, I find I'm quite I'm quite annoyed about it, because I was starting to build momentum in Morecambe. I felt like I was starting to find myself, and the fans were always responding to me. They weren't very nice, but I was always getting a big response. And then suddenly it was cut out from underneath me by somebody who I didn't necessarily consider a friend, but was definitely an ally. Somebody had stood beside me, and then suddenly I'm being blindsided from behind. And I didn't return to Morecambe for 8 years after that. I never got the chance again after that for a long time, and that was because of Dekker.
Yeah, like you say, you've never been back since, until the appearance on the screen, which we'll talk about in a moment, because we'll talk about what's coming up at Mutiny on June the 14th. But what happened after that, Alton? You've not been seen in Morecambe, like you say, since 2017. You had this real passion for deathmatch wrestling, which we talked about earlier from your days reading Power Slam and buying the DVDs. Had you done much deathmatch wrestling before that time, or did that all happen after you left Morecambe?
So I'd not done any. I'd always kind of been interested in hardcore wrestling, because my two favorite wrestlers of all time are Terry Funk and Mick Foley. And you can't love those two wrestlers without having a little inkling of, love for the hardcore scene. So whenever I got a chance, if I was asked what I wanted to do, it was always like, can I have a street fight? Can I have a hardcore match? Just wanted to get, like I was saying earlier, get reps in, practice, figure out what works, figure out what doesn't in those kind of scenarios. But no, the deathmatch stuff didn't start soon after I left Morecambe. What actually happened was myself and Barricade got in touch with Charles and asked whether we could continue to use the name outside of Morecambe, because we thought it was a great fit for what we were doing. The name suited us. It was short and snappy, and we thought it would look good on a t-shirt if we ever became good guys and decided to actually sell some, because we didn't think we'd sell any with how mean we were being at the time. So for a while, myself and Barricade took the Hellbound name and took it further. We traveled the country as Hellbound. We wrestled in London as Hellbound. We wrestled in Birmingham as Hellbound. We, did lots of stuff with that. And then Barricade retired. He retired during lockdown. His knees, big guy. If you do enough wrestling over time and you're bearing that much weight and you're a big fella, eventually your knees started wearing out. And I think the break that he got from lockdown made him realize that actually he quite liked his body being functional and being able to walk of a morning. So he said, "Oh, and I think I'm out. I think I'm done." And I started to think to myself, well, where does that leave me? What am I now in the business? And then somebody asked me if I wanted to do a death match, and I jumped at the chance. Like, they didn't even have to ask me twice. I knew the second it came. I knew before I was asked if I ever got the chance, I would give it a go. But then the opportunity came up, and I thought, well, I don't have Barricade anymore. I don't have Hellbound. This is maybe the new direction for me, and thus it has been for the last 3.5 years now.
And you can watch a lot of the matches that you've had during that period of time. They're available on YouTube for various different promotions around the UK. I would only recommend watching them if you're not of a nervous disposition at times, because you put your body, your opponent's bodies, through quite a lot of violent punishment.
Yeah.
We need to sort of give people who've not seen it a flavour. What would you say, Alton? Can you pick, I don't know, 2 or 3 particularly dangerous, violent situations, moves that you've been in during the past few years that you could actually sort of pinpoint as typical of what you've been doing?
I can do it with one. There was a wrestling match in Derby. It was myself versus B.A. Rose, who's another wrestler like myself who does a lot of deathmatch, but also does a lot of family style shows as well. So kind of blends the two things, which I think is quite important in Britain because it's such a small space that it's not like America where you can travel around and do death matches, solely death matches. If you want to do death matches in England, you might get one a month, you might get two if you're lucky. So you've got to be doing the family show circuit as well. So myself and BA Rose have been doing that for years. Now we had a death match in Derby which ended with him on my back with barbed wire wrapped around my neck, climbing onto my back in a kind of piggyback position, and I kind of started to pass out and faded, and it just so happened that I fell through a giant glass sheet to a concrete floor with B.A. Rose on my back choking me out with barbed wire. Now I think that's about as dangerous as it gets, right? So there you go. That's the kind of, that's not unusual for the kind of wrestling that I do at the moment. That's the kind of levels that it gets to. You look disturbed, Greg.
A little. And bear in mind, I used to manage Iceman back in the day. Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I believe you wrestled his son. Is that right?
I frequently wrestled his son. We have a huge rivalry in Scotland as we speak at the moment. We have a death match coming up, I believe, in August, which is for the Bleeding Gums deathmatch title. So yeah, I've wrestled Iceman's son quite a lot. Iceman was somebody that I looked up to because, again, through Styx, like I'd seen Iceman matches when they were in the same places. In fact, there's a match that I often reference which had Styx and Iceman tagging with a couple of other people against Mick Foley, the Sandman, and Steve Corino, you know? And for me, that was mind blowing because it's like there are guys on our scene that do this kind of hardcore stuff. So I immediately looked up to Iceman straight away. So wrestling his son now is kind of one of those full circle moments where it's all panned out quite nicely.
It's mad you mentioned that match because I was managing Iceman in that match. Coventry Skydome, Universal
That's
Uproar,
right.
November 2005. Mad, absolutely mad. Jack Harrop is what we're talking about, isn't it? That's who I think was just a little lad, I think, when I knew him. So yeah, that's shows how old I. That makes me feel quite old. Anyway. But what about injuries for yourself, Alton? You know, have you suffered many serious injuries?
I've been very lucky. I haven't suffered, touch wood, I haven't suffered any major injuries. I've got a lot of scars. I've had a lot of minor injuries. I've been concussed once, but I've never broken a bone. I've never like done any serious muscle damage or ligament damage, which is insane for the amount of matches that I've done and the style of wrestling that I've done. I've been incredibly lucky to kind of. I mean, I've never been through any specific serious period of time where I haven't been wrestling. Like I've been consistent for 11 years at this point, so very lucky, and I do think it is luck. Like
We one of the greatest hardcore wrestlers of all time, we sadly lost recently, Sabu. What does Sabu mean to you?
an innovator of the highest caliber. I think, and a lot of people have been saying this. A lot of like people that were around him. I think he changed wrestling for a lot of people, like the style that he brought. There's a match where he was against the Lightning Kid, who was Sean Waltman from the Indies. I think it was in like 1993. And you can tell that the crowd watching it have never seen the kind of stuff that they're doing before because they're in absolute awe of the match. And it's because Sabu brought a style that you would not see anywhere. Like he I had the opportunity to see Sabu twice in person, and the one thing I'll say about him is he's the most unpredictable wrestler I've ever seen. You did not, you never knew what was coming next with Sabu. It was out of left field every single time, and I'm not sure he always knew what he was going to do next either. But it's excitement and passion and incredible toughness to kind of slice open your arm and tie it back up, or like dislocate your jaw and tie it together to carry on the match. So I think he's one of the greats, especially for the style of wrestling that I love. I think he's one of the most influential and innovative wrestlers from the 90s. And I think he'll be deeply, deeply missed by a lot of people.
Yeah, he certainly will. And certainly echo every single word that you've said. Again, somebody who, I discovered Sabu from reading Power Slam myself, someone who was really heavily featured in Power Slam magazine back in the era that, we were talking about, the sort of the mid 90s, the ECW era onwards. And you're sort of keeping that hardcore wrestling alive. You and a number of people, there's a scene that perhaps people need to become more aware of in the UK. Are there any other particular names, particular promotions that you want to name check that are keeping that hardcore wrestling, that deathmatch scene alive in the UK?
But the scene is actually growing. I think, if anything, is probably in a healthier position than it's ever been in. Because back in the day when Iceman was doing it, like mid 2010s ish, like 2014, 2015, yeah, like a lot of those shows were taking place in like the Bits in Stoke-on-Trent, small rooms, and there wasn't the audience for it wasn't there at the time. But I think with COVID, there were only a couple of shows that were streaming live wrestling, and both of them were deathmatch companies, other than WWE, who were doing the weird stuff with the screens at the time that nobody really liked. So it kind of revitalized the scene, because when everything started opening up again, people had a hunger for that kind of hardcore and deathmatch wrestling. But the company Rise, from primarily in Leeds, they were continuing to keep deathmatch alive. Before that, they were doing deathmatches from, I think, like 2017 with guys like Big Effin' Joe. Danny Darko.
Joe FX, I think he was, back when he wrestled in Morecambe. WAW, trained by Ricky Knight, I think.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And funnily enough, when I started doing deathmatch, I spoke to Styx and I said, I know you're not going to be able to give me any advice because you don't even really like it. But if you were to tell me what advice you would give me, what would you give me? And he said, go speak to Joe, because Styx and Joe knew each other really well and got on well. So that was great for me, because Joe was like, oh, Styx? Well, you should bring this with you to the show and be prepared for that, and just gave me a whole rundown. So that connection with Styx always comes in clutch. But now we have multiple companies breaking out and selling out shows. There's Kumite and Derby. Bleeding Gums have just been mentioned in the Wrestling Observer again, from Scotland. CXW have just started running large 18 plus shows. So there's lots and lots of companies that are starting to spark it up now, and names like Tomby and Franco Fate and BA Rose are all these guys that are coming through that you have to look out for, because all three of those guys can do any style of wrestling, and they choose to do this. And the reason people choose to do this is because we love it and we're passionate about it, because it's a huge sacrifice, and it's a massive risk. And I think the fans know that, and they give back more at those shows because they understand the sacrifice that you're making for them. So those shows are always like so much fun, and so they're a pleasure to be on, even if you pay for it for the next couple of days afterwards.
We need to mention ICW as well. I think probably the best known promotion in the UK that has kind of done, the extreme style of wrestling. Certainly back in the the early 2010s. I think it was, I went to a few shows up in Glasgow, and there was one or two eye-opening things going on up there at the time.
I think they had that kind of ECW vibe of like, it's not fully deathmatch, but the rules are very relaxed here and anything can happen. And ICW actually was the first place that I saw Sabu wrestle, because they did a show in Nottingham and brought Sabu over. So ICW like kind of proved that there is an audience for this style in the UK. So we've got a lot to thank ICW for. And to be fair, for a while, they were the hottest independent company in the world. Like maybe a couple of years, they were the biggest thing. Like they sold 800-seater venue, I think. That's not bad for a hardcore company. That's pretty good going. So, yeah.
Over 6,000 one year for the show at the Hydro in
the Hydro.
Yeah.
Crazy numbers, isn't it? Yeah. It's crazy numbers.
Absolutely. So that's what you've been doing since 2017, when we last saw you in Morecambe. Since Dekker hit you in the back of the head with the chain, you had to leave Morecambe Wrestling. And, you've been going around the country, making a name for yourself. And now it's all come full circle, like we said before, because at War on the Shore, Andre Dekker, who's now in that time really established himself as one of the big names in Morecambe Wrestling, and kind of been forgiven a little bit, quite a lot, in fact, by the Morecambe Wrestling fans for some of his past sins. He's now incredibly popular, and now the Odyssey Pro Wrestling champion. He just defeated Craig Collins in his first title defense when the blast from his past appeared on the screen, which was yourself, making it very clear that you hadn't forgiven him, you hadn't forgotten.
Oh, I don't forgive and I don't forget.
And you're coming for him. And the Morecambe fans don't forget. That's the great thing about the Morecambe fans. They've got an amazing memory. They knew who you were. They remembered it. Did you watch the footage back? What did you think when you watched that footage back of yourself on the screen? Dekker's response to it, the Morecambe fans' response to it.
My favourite part was seeing Dekker's face. It was like he'd seen a ghost, which was exactly what I wanted. Honestly, what he did in the early stages of my career to me dealt me a huge blow. I was just starting to really get the wind in my sails. I felt like I was going places in Morecambe Wrestling. And then Dekker took that away from me. And the people might have forgiven him for the things that he's done in the past, the things that he said. But I know who he truly is, because I spent time with him behind the scenes in the business, and I know he's not a good person. I know that this is a facade. This is false. He will do what it takes to win. That's who he truly is at his core. He's a mean, horrible person who will do what it takes to win, right? That's exactly who I am as well, right? So he might have fooled the fans, but he can't fool me, because we're the same. We're the same person. He is what I am. And quite frankly, if I could go back now to back in the day, I would have hit him in the back of the head with a chain first, and I'd have sent him packing. Right? Simple as that. So I just want Dekker to know. I want Dekker to know that his time's up. Like, you don't get to take all of that from me. You don't get to take my passion. You don't get to take my opportunities away from me and then just watch me fade into obscurity. Because whilst he has been becoming the man in Morecambe, I've been becoming the man all over the UK in the most brutal style of wrestling possible. He's faced it. Craig Collins is a hell of a competitor, a fantastic wrestler, right? But he's not as brutal as I am. He doesn't have his limits are not where my limits are. I'll go above and beyond. I will do whatever it takes, not just to take the title, because that'll be a pleasure for me, but really to hurt Dekker. That's what I want to do. I want to hurt him. I want to hurt him physically, and then I want to take his title, and I want to hurt him mentally and emotionally as well, because that's what he did to me. And sat at home watching the shows go from strength to strength, thinking I should be there And then for him to start acting like he's a hero and be talking about being a fighting champion with everything that he's done to me, quite honestly, I find it pretty disgusting. So Dekker's going to get what's coming to him.
I was going to ask you if there was any respect whatsoever for what Dekker's achieved, but I think I know what the answer is. I think I know what you're going to say.
Well, no, I've got no respect for Dekker. I can appreciate that he's achieved a lot, and I do think he's a hell of an athlete. Right, but skipping ropes aren't going to stop what Alton Thorne does. Like, there's nothing that he hasn't got answers to this question. So I might respect him as a competitor. I might appreciate that he's come a long way in his career to be where he is now. He just doesn't have the answers for what I'm offering. So
Morecambe's obviously known for a lot of things. It's known for being real in Morecambe. It's known for being a family audience and for the great reactions that all the wrestlers get there. How much of what you do, Alton Thorne, what kind of violence levels? Are there any limits, bearing in mind that you're in Morecambe, in terms of what you can do to Andre Dekker when you fight for the wrestling title on June the 14th?
I will take it as far as I need to walk away with the title. Does that answer the question?
It does. It does. Okay. So it's going to happen. It's going to be Odyssey Pro Wrestling Championship on the line. Andre Dekker, the champion, versus the challenger, the blast from the past. Alton Thorne returning to Morecambe. You've heard what he has to say. We'll see what happens on June the 14th at Mutiny. Alton, it's been amazing speaking to you. It's been great catching up with you, and great to reminisce and talk a little bit about your memories of wrestling in Morecambe and looking ahead to the future as well.
Thanks very much for having me on, Greg. I'll see you in a month's time with a title belt over my shoulder.
I look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much, Alton Thorne. This has been the Morecambe Wrestling Podcast. Make sure you check us out on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Beyond Radio, and everywhere you get podcasts.